Hey everybody, I wanted to go over essentially what I'm asking for the final paper. I know I've already gone over it once in class, but I wanted to have this for you on Blackboard just as another reference, in case you all could use some further clarification. So, as I mentioned before, three different parts of this paper. Let's use 10 pages, 10 to 12 pages, so let's use 10 pages as our benchmark here, or kind of like what my suggestions would be for you. 3 pages or so for the first part of your paper where you're just talking about your theory. So let's say your strategy. So if we're talking, let's say we're using Denning and we're just talking about leadership presence, right? So you would simply just talk about leadership presence in that section of the paper. Now, I always connect leadership presence with nonverbal communication. I kind of give you an example. If you go to the video I just posted on Blackboard about using the library databases, you'll see what I mean. But I always link leadership presence with nonverbal communication. So bring in Denning, and then if you want additional sources, go use a library database and look up nonverbal communication and kind of figure out what it is about it that you want to include in this discussion about leadership presence. That's your first section of the paper. The second section is what we call an artifact. And I like calling it that way because we're thinking about it in an academic sense. But it could be a TV show, it could be a movie, it could be an actual political speech that was given, it could be a case study that you're looking at. And some folks have even used personal experience, but I do warn folks that it becomes difficult because it's really hard to use up those 2 to 3 pages you should be focusing on for that second part of your paper. But it is an option for you. But let's say you want to talk about leadership presence, and then you talk about, let's say, the movie Big with Tom Hanks, right? So even though he's essentially a child, he grows, gets big, and then he's in this world where he actually has a professional job, and you can kind of see the difference in the way that he portrays an adult, but it's in the way a kid thinks. So you can talk about the differences and focus in on that. But in the second part of your paper, all you would talk about is Big. Who wrote it, who produced it, who directed it, who are the main actors, and then give me a synopsis about the story, about a kid who makes a wish on this the little wizard thing, ends up becoming an adult, has to work at a toy company, however you want to provide that synopsis, but that's really what that second part is all about, just talking about your artifact. At the very end of that section, you can say something along the lines, kind of like a transition sentence, something like, now that you have a good understanding about my artifact, I will now make sense of leadership presence using examples from my artifact, or from this film, or from this TV show, however you want to frame it. Then you get to the third section where you actually apply it, right? And so in this section, if we're using that same example of that movie Big, you would get scenes of the movie. Like in this scene, Tom Hanks's character, actually use the name of the character from the movie, however you want to frame it. This happens in the movie, and this is an example of what Denning says about leadership presence, right? That is what your third section of your paper should read about. It should just be, here's an example, or here's a description of a scene, and here is my interpretation of how that either reinforces or explains this aspect of this theory or this strategy or leadership presence or the enablers, like whatever it is, but that's how you should outline your paper, where it's one section about your theory, like about 3 pages, 2 to 3 pages on your artifact, and then 2 to 3 pages where you're getting examples from your artifact and having them make sense of whatever theory or strategy you use. Then from there, you have about half page to a full page for your introduction, half page to a full page for your conclusion, and that's your paper. Then you need to have a cover page and your reference page. You don't need an abstract. But that's essentially should be what your paper looks like. I've had some folks talk to me already and say, this is probably the longest paper that they've had to write in a while, and I completely understand that. But I try to put it together in this way to make it a little bit easier to map out your thoughts. Because if we were going like with the traditional way of writing a paper, an academic paper, you would have your introduction and then a literature review and then your methodology and then your analysis and then your discussion and then your results and then your conclusion. And that's a lot to do in 8 weeks. So we're essentially kind of sort of doing the same thing, but we're taking some shortcuts, trying to just go through the process of here's a theory, here's what I'm applying it to, and here is essentially my discussion of how it all makes sense. So I hope that helps. As always, you can always reach out to me via email, text message, whatever is easier for you, or you can stick around after our Zoom sessions and ask me whatever questions you want about the paper.